Reggie here. Oh, wrong way. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my live streams. So, I decided to go live this morning because two things. One, I saw a video on YouTube earlier today that caught my interest, so we'll talk about that. And then the second thing is my wife actually sent me a link to an article that caught my interest. So we'll talk about those two things in just a second. This is an unusual time for me to actually go live, so we'll see whether people are able to join. But if maybe I had seen one of these things in isolation, maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to kind of speak on them. But the fact that I saw them back to back in relatively close proximity kind of prompted me to go live and to talk a little bit about it and to also see what you all's thoughts are on these two things. So if you hear some noise in the background, I'll have to apologize because I have some guys here actually working on the house for me, doing a couple of things. So help me find my keys is here in the chat. He says, finally made it for the live stream. I'm guessing it's a him, it could be a her, but welcome to the chat, brother. It's good to see you. 23 Famzy, I guess that's how you say that. Welcome. So the first thing that kind of caught my attention earlier today was I had finished up watching John's Comments with Kids and his live feed that he does first thing in the morning. Oftentimes sitting there with a cup of coffee as I watch he and his kids kind of talk about comics, which I think is really cool. Then I saw a video pop up. It was a Keenan and Peele video, and it mentioned Stan Lee in the title. So I went ahead and clicked on it because I wanted to check it out. No clue what it was, but I know Keenan and Peele kind of do satire and that kind of stuff. And what I was presented with was basically a spoof of Stan Lee. And I didn't watch the whole thing. I didn't give it a thumbs down. I didn't even make a comment. When it got to a point where I was like, oh, I don't think this is what I wanted, I just clicked off. But essentially, they were poking fun at Stan Lee. And I don't think that this is a new video. I just think it was the Google, I'm sorry, not Google, but the YouTube, right? Algorithm on the backside that served up this content because of the fact that Stan Lee's name is in the news for obvious reasons. And, but it was, in my opinion, from what I saw, it was a video that was in poor taste. I have no problem with satire, with free speech, with, making fun of people. It's just, for me, as a fan of Stan Lee, it wasn't something that I wanted to see. So I just kind of clicked off of it. My guess is, again, it's an old video. It's a Keenan and Peele video. My guess is that it actually has a ton of views, but they won't get any from me. Let's put it that way. So I don't know if you guys have seen this thing, but just be aware. So I saw that. No big deal, cool. I'm trying to, continue with my day. And I was running some errands and I got a message from my wife. And the message was basically a link to a news article. And the title of the thing basically says, Bill Maher disrespects Stan Lee's legacy and questions the importance of comic books. So of course I had to click that. So again, Bill Maher disrespects Stan Lee's legacy and questions the importance of comic books. So I had to click on that, and I was actually at the bank. I was sitting in the car, and I sat there and actually read this article in the car. So then I'm like, I'm going live. So then I end up driving home and printed off the article, the blog post that Bill Maher had actually put up, because I wanted to read his actual words. I wanted to read what he was saying and not necessarily someone's interpretation of what he was saying. And to be honest with you, the article made it seem worse than what it was. Not to say that what he said was right. It just wasn't as bad as I thought that it was. So in this article, he basically says two things. He says a couple of things, but as I boil it down, there were kind of two things that were being said. One, Stan Lee offered nothing to society. That was to me a clear point, that he offered nothing to society. And then another kind of point was that he was saying that people that read comics are not adults. And he continued on to say that comic books and comic book readers by extension are the reason that Donald Trump was elected. Yeah. So it's like where to begin with this stuff, right? He says here, the guy who created Spider-Man and Hulk has died, and America is in mourning. Deep, deep mourning for a man who inspired millions to, I don't know, watch a movie, I guess. So first, Stan did much more than that, right? He did much more than inspire people to watch movies. The movies, in my opinion, were like an afterthought for some of the things that Stan actually did back when he was writing comics, right? And here's the thing. I'm not saying that Stan was perfect. I'm not saying that he was, you know, infallible. I'm not saying that he didn't have his flaws and his quirks, because we all do, right? That is not the point of what I'm saying. But to discredit everything that he has done and to say that his inspiration was nil is incorrect. That is incorrect, right? So what Stan did, and you guys will probably, a couple of more people have come into the room here, but you guys will probably be able to add to this. But what Stan did in many respects is basically say, yes, we are all different, but we are also the same. That pointing out someone's difference isn't necessarily the right thing to do, because we are all people. We are all working to theoretically towards a common good, to a better society. And the differences aren't all that important, you know? And Stan drew some contrasts in some respects. There was some a political undertone to some of the things that he did. There was a societal message to some of the things that he spoke about. He spoke to like teenage angst and the importance of responsibility. With power comes great responsibility, right? That message is pretty universal. I mean, that's some solid stuff there if you really sit and think about it. You know, when I look at like the X-Men, for example, they were outcast. They were shunned because they were different. But at the same time, they still tried to do the right thing for society as a whole, right? Even though they were portrayed as being bad people, they were still good people and still working very hard, you know, to protect innocent people. You know, then you had like the Morlocks, for example, right? Now I can't remember if Stan did that, but it's a continuation of that theme, right? Of you have people that are even lower and even more of an outcast, that are forced to hide themselves from society because they aren't accepted. You know, if someone can't see what he was trying to say with some of those themes, then maybe they aren't paying close enough attention. You know, and some even accuse Stan and other comic book artists of being over the top by having a soapbox and being too political. That might be the case, but at the same time, with great power comes responsibility, and sometimes that responsibility, it can be exaggerated. But this guy saying, you know, he goes on to say, there was someone who put up a post on Reddit, and this person said, "I am incredibly grateful I lived in a world that included Stan Lee." And Bill says, personally, I am grateful I live in a world that included oxygen and trees, but to each his own. Bro, you are missing the point of what this person was probably trying to say. You know, he is missing the point. And this idea, again, that Stan offered nothing to society is just fundamentally incorrect. You know, so let me see what you guys are talking about here in the chat. 23 is saying he's probably just trying to get attention. There is no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that, brother. But even in those that are trying to get attention and to be shock jocks, you know, and I'm not saying that you're saying I shouldn't do this video, but when they do things that aren't necessarily good, they should still be highlighted. And it's unfortunate that, you know, maybe I'm publicizing what he's saying, but still, you know, I felt like the need to actually say a little something. And I'm not going to read your next comment about it being the dumbest thing you've ever heard, but hey, you know, maybe I just did. Brandon, I see you, brother. Comics with Bueller, it's good to see you, man. So, you know, yeah, and I don't know. Help Finding with Keys says it sounds like someone is speaking on a legacy he's not at all familiar with. Seems to be a trend these days. That could very well be the case, to be honest with you. But he goes on in here to say that he actually has nothing against comics. He actually read comics, you know. So I don't know. I don't know. What he wrote was relatively brief. So maybe to your point, there is a lack of understanding. But one would also have to look at the backlash against what people are now saying in response to his 3 paragraphs. And sometimes the best thing to do when you make a mistake is to acknowledge that you made a mistake, that you were ill-informed, and then to try to correct it, to maybe take the post down now that you are informed that maybe what you were saying isn't necessarily correct. When you hold yourself above others and then you are incorrect, in my opinion, you have to unring that bell some way. You know, at least that's how I try to think about mistakes, right? Because we all make mistakes. The question is, what do you do about the mistakes when someone points it out to you? Do you act like it doesn't exist, or do you acknowledge that maybe you were misinformed and then offer not necessarily an apology, but take corrective measures, you know? So I don't know. Bait the Snake has some interesting words for Bill Maher. Stan changed the world we live in. He influenced artists and people who influence. Brother, well said. Well said. Someone compared it to like a pebble in the pond, right? You drop a pebble in the pond, and in and of itself, it may not be significant, but the ripple effects that it has can be quite impressive in terms of the impact that they can have on others. So I thought this stuff was a little interesting. And in my mind, I almost think about like Stan Lee the same way I think about Gene Roddenberry. I think that's how you say his last name. But I was a big fan, and still am, of the Star Trek TV show. The original, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, you name it. I am all about Star Trek. But what Gene Roddenberry was doing back in the 60s was he had green people, and, you know, he had aliens, and he had, you know, Asian people, Russians, black people, all on a spaceship, all living in this ideal society. Well, it wasn't quite ideal, but you know what I mean. It was like people have set aside their minor differences for the pursuit of scientific exploration. And if you watch that, you could just be entertained by the sci-fi nature of Star Trek. Some just found it corny, but you could be inspired by that sci-fi story, you know, with Kirk sleeping with the green woman. Or you could look at that and say he is delivering to society a message that our differences should be set aside if we want to advance society. And so, you know, some could just look at it and see an entertaining show, but others might be able to see something a little bit different. Now, is Gene Roddenberry any, you know, less of an influence on society than Stan Lee? I don't know. You know, both of them were delivering, in my opinion, entertainment, but they were carrying along with that entertainment something to benefit society. And that's what, in my opinion, makes both guys special, but also what they created special as well. Now, what was interesting about this Bill Maher thing is that he put this thing under the title of adulting, almost to say that people who read comics are not adults, because, you know, he goes on to talk about here how now I have nothing against comics. I read them now and then when I was a kid, But the assumption everyone had back then, both the adults and the kids, was that comics were for kids. And when you grow up, you moved on to big boy books without pictures. Now, what's interesting about that is that I've heard from, and I was reading an article from some early educators, and also I think one was like a college professor who basically said that comic books actually offer something to people learning to read and people struggling to read in terms of like reading comprehension. Because in one panel or one page, if you will, you have the words, and then you also have the images that convey meaning beyond the words. And so someone could read a comic and actually maybe understand the words, and if not, have the visual to support their understanding and their reading comprehension. And this one professor goes on to actually say that the way that comic books are done, it actually encourages people to not just read something once, but to reread it a couple of times, which actually adds to someone's understanding of what they're actually reading. And so I was playing around with this idea of maybe doing a video on the value of comics beyond just entertainment. And so that's why I was kind of doing this research. But I've had a couple of early childhood educators that have actually encouraged me and given me recommendations for books, comic books that my children should read. And my kids are still relatively young and we still read to them. But at the appropriate time, their thought was that by having kids read comics, it would actually make them better readers. And which, in my opinion, hopefully makes them adults who have a thirst for knowledge. You know what I'm saying? But this idea that comics are just for children, I struggle with that. I struggle with the assertion that that is just for kids. So I don't know. I don't know. I think that thinking is a little closed-minded. And maybe it's not your thing, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong because it's not your thing, right? And he actually says in here, but the assumption everyone had back then, and we all know what happens with assumptions, right? All right, let's see what you guys are saying here in the chat. Comics help me learn. Here, Brandon is making my point. Brandon says, comics help me to learn to read. Comments like X-Men and Spider-Man 2099 inspired me to be more than what society says I should be. Come on. Come on. You know, I mean, and here's the thing, a comic book did that, right? If, in my opinion, if someone is inspired to do something positive, does it matter where the inspiration comes from, right? Should you frown upon someone's source of inspiration because it's not something that you understand? You know, I don't get that. If people are saying comics have helped me to do this or to think like that or whatever it is, why would you question the value or the validity of that inspiration, right? Brandon is saying that comics actually helped him to learn to read and inspired him to be more than what society thought he should be. It doesn't get better than that. You know, Bake the Snake is saying, I think maybe he was right for back then, but comics have evolved into something much bigger. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Chet is saying, I learned to read from X-Men 110 in 1979. My dad made me look everything up I didn't understand. Literally learning source for me, and he's in his 40s. I'm in my 40s as well, my friend, so I definitely get where you're coming from. And God bless your dad for encouraging you to do that. I remember reading things early on, and my mother would do the same thing for me. Not necessarily comics at the time, but she would encourage me to pull out a dictionary, and she would say, look it up. And you know, I was reading on an advanced level when I was a kid. My vocabulary then, and I think now, is a pretty good one, probably because my mother kept saying to look things up that I didn't understand. And then you go and you look it up, and then you don't forget it. You don't forget it when you actually have to find the answer. At least that's my opinion. But again, you have people here that are saying that comics inspired them, comics helped them to read. And again, whether it's, I mean, here's the thing. Is Dr. Seuss any better or worse than a comic book, right? I mean, let's be honest. Green Eggs and Ham, like, maybe there was some moral to it. It's just strange because I don't want green eggs and ham. But it's like we give children these books that to teach them to read, and there's really nothing behind it other than words on a page, right? See Spot Run. I had those books backwards and forwards, and I remember See Spot Run like nobody's business. And I had a whole collection of them, and that's what I was learning to read. But seeing Spot Run and all that stuff offered me no value other than I could see Spot run and Spot sit, and you know, there was nothing there. So Bake the Snake, oh yeah, well, looking up, I meant to grab the encyclopedia. Dr. Seuss is just a hardcover comic with some poor art, my friend. But it's like, it's silly. It really is. So this guy goes on and he says that I guess we are pretending that comic books are actually sophisticated literature. I don't know that I have ever made that argument that comics are sophisticated literature. What I will say is that I think that comic books have a place in society in terms of, as we've already talked about, maybe helping people read, maybe helping people with reading comprehension, maybe inspiring people, because in many ways there are some morals and some values, in my opinion, good and bad, good and evil. That is a common theme. You know, treachery, deceit, all of these themes play out in comic books, and there is some value to those things, but I don't know that I've ever said that a comic is sophisticated literature. I'm not sure that I would ever say that. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm just saying that for me, that's never really occurred to me. And he goes on here to say, and now when adults are forced to forced to do grown-up things like buy auto insurance, they call it adulting and act like it's some giant struggle. It's called humor, bro. I mean, you're a comedian, right? People say adulting because they're poking fun at the fact that life can be hard, but it's a necessity, right? We all acknowledge it's a necessity, but that doesn't mean that you have to enjoy it, and that doesn't mean that you can't poke fun at that thing, you know? So the guy is just, I don't know. He goes on here to say, I don't think that it's a huge stretch to suggest that Donald Trump could only get elected in a country that thinks comic books are important. And my interpretation of this is that he's basically saying that comic book readers are stupid, and that we are the reason that Donald Trump was elected. I just don't get that. I don't get that. I don't get how he can make that leap. You know, he's making comments here that, you know, the problem is we're using our smarts on stupid stuff like reading comics. I struggle with the connections that he is making, and how because we know that he doesn't like Donald Trump, right? But to say that comic books and comic book readers are the reason that Donald Trump was elected, I struggle with that notion. I really do. Comic Books NYC is saying he's stuck in his own bubble. Yeah, he definitely is. Dr. Seuss, the director who did Wonderful Life, 12 Angry Men, and Stan all worked together in World War II. Oh, check that out. Check that. I did not know that. So Aggressively Relaxing says that Dr. Seuss, the director who did A Wonderful Life, 12 Angry Men, and Stan all worked together in World War II, and they went on to shape American culture. Wow. Thank you, brother. That's a good contribution. I did not know that. The problem is the new man-child generation, said the 60-year-old Peter Pan from the generation that gave us the votes for Well done, sir. Well done, sir. He needs controversy to fuel a dead career. Yeah, well said, chat. Well said. All right, so Bake the Snake says Donald Trump was elected because he ran against Hillary. Has nothing to do with comics or being stupid. There is definitely some political stuff here that I'm not going to get into, but I don't think that comic books and comic book readers are the reason that Donald Trump was elected. I was reading something and someone commented and said that's like saying that wrestling, right, which is a form of entertainment, is the reason that Donald Trump was elected. It's just, Donald Trump was elected either because people voted for a weak candidate or didn't vote or whatever. It has nothing to do with comics. And the fact that he is trying to connect Stan Lee's passing to Donald Trump is the biggest stretch ever. Like, how do you connect Stan Lee passing away at 95 years of age to Donald Trump being elected president? I don't even know how you do that. Especially in 3 paragraphs. He did this. Donald Trump died. People are stupid. I'm sorry. Stan Lee passed away. People are stupid. That's why Donald Trump was elected president. He did it in 3 paragraphs. That's a struggle. That's a struggle, my friend. I definitely don't understand that one. Yeah, so Bake the Snake is basically saying, thanks for the knowledge drop, aggressively relaxing. Yeah, brother, he came in off the top with that one. No one knew that, I don't think. So Chad is saying because he's from Bizarro World. I don't know, man. And again, you know, I probably would not have done this video or done this live feed if I had not seen those 2 things back to back. And the 2 things were a Keenan and Peele spoof of Stan Lee, which I found in poor taste. And then this 3-paragraph write-up, let's call it, basically connecting Stan Lee to stupid people, and then to that is the reason why Donald Trump was elected. Had I not seen those 2 things back to back, I probably would not have done this, but I did, and so here we are. You know, I feel like there is going to potentially be a nice little wave here on the backside of Stan's passing where people are going to poke fun at him, poke fun at us for taking a moment to acknowledge his contribution to society and to us as individuals. I think that we, on the backside of his passing, could potentially be seeing a wave where people are going to take shots. And that's unfortunate, you know, that is unfortunate that people are going to do that. But as evidenced by these 2 things, we'll see. We'll see, you know. I don't know. I think that both of these things are really in poor taste, just because the timing is really bad. The connections and leaps that they are making are very broad. And I question it all. You know, I hope that we don't see what I'm thinking we could see, but I don't know. Anyway, we get caught up here. Bill Maher, Luke Cage is saying Bill Maher is pond scum. Stan Lee stood for something good. Yeah. Has dealt with drug abuse, racism. Oh, so basically here's a comment here. The problem with Bill Maher's comments is that he doesn't understand addressing a lot of society's problems, probably starting in the early 60s till now. He's talking about drug abuse, racism, sexuality, a lot more honestly. Comics have made people a lot better because of these issues that they've covered. Well said, brother. Well said. I think that, you know, if you look at, for example, some early comics with how Sue Storm was portrayed early in comics, it bothered me when I read some of the early Fantastic Four books, right? Because she was portrayed, for example, as being the weak link of the team, the one that always needed to be saved. She was getting kidnapped by the Submariner, and the team had to rescue her, and she was fainting and falling out, and her powers, essentially, if you think about it, her power was to turn invisible, to disappear and to let the boys handle things. And it bothered me, the fact that she was portrayed that way. Now, if you fast forward, how she has evolved into one of the stronger members of the team, who was able to use her force fields to do things with, to protect the team, to shelter the team, to take down enemies, right? She's used her powers in a way that I don't know that they envisioned it early on. And it was impressive to see that evolution. And I wonder how closely it coincides with the feminist movement in the United States, right? I haven't looked at that, but that's one of the things that I find maybe fascinating. So whenever I read those early FF books, I have to remind myself that this was a reflection of the time. And I have to do that not just with women, but I have to sometimes remember and remind myself that it was a reflection of the time. And then if you look at it as increments, incrementally it begins to change, and it moves in this direction of, this is how maybe society is, to maybe this is how society should be. And again, if you pay attention, you can actually see the evolution take place. But that's a very good point that you raised there. Very good point. Kirby saw increments, cramps in his fan, real storm. Creating the first black superhero was no small feat either. Stan moved the needle in the culture. Bill Maher missed the mark completely. Great comment there. Comic Books NYC, well said there, brother. Strong ideas about good fighting evil shaped one of the worst events in human history. Well said there. And again, you know, this guy basically saying that Stan Lee was irrelevant is a misinformed idea. To say that comic books have no place in society and that the comic books and comic book readers are the reason why Trump was elected, I guess he has to tie it all back to what he focuses on, which is, you know, politics and the election. But to do it on the back of Stan Lee and comic book readers, I just think is in very poor taste. You know, I really do struggle. I really do struggle with this one. So anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I want to thank you guys for taking a couple of moments to kind of chat with me on this topic. You know, Bill Maher is only out for ratings. He's always been like that. It's been like this, which is stupid. Well said, Goomba. So I don't know, man. It's just I don't know. I hope this is definitely not a trend that we'll see, you know. And I've said this to people before, that I was very hesitant early on as an adult to even talk about comics and even to acknowledge the fact that I read comics, because I do agree with some of this stuff that, you know, my family to some degree believed that comic books were for children. And even as a kid, they frowned upon me actually reading comics. Because I guess, you know, it was just a childish thing to do. It was a nerdy thing to do. And so I never really spoke about comics at all out loud. There were some names when I first started recording videos that I had never even said out loud. And the fact that this guy is basically saying that I should be ashamed of reading comics, that bothers me, right? Because, you know, I am pushing back against that. I am pushing back against the notion that I should be ashamed. And the fact that he's trying to say that I should be, it really does bother me, because I enjoy reading comic books. I enjoy collecting them. I enjoy talking about them. And I don't feel that I should have to hide that. Hence all the videos that I make now, you know. I am actually going to show that comment there, Goomba. They blocked it, but I'm going to show that comment because that's a good one, my friend. I am not ashamed of being a comic book reader or a comic book collector. And I am going to resist the notion that says that I should be. So I think you guys are probably on the same page as me with some of this stuff. I think that we have to continue reminding people that this is a hobby, and it is a hobby for adults, and it is a perfectly acceptable hobby. It really is an acceptable, because it makes us happy. And that's exactly what hobbies should do, right? They should be, in my opinion, constructive hobbies that make you happy. And it doesn't matter whether you want to collect art or figures or Funko Pops or comic books or baseball cards or any of that other stuff. If it makes you happy, then I think that you should do it. On that note, I'm going to get myself out of here. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me just a little bit. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this chat. All right, take care, guys.